Temple Micah, we are very proud of our relationship with HIAS and are grateful that this venerable and historic American Jewish institution is there to advocate for compassionate and just immigration policies for this country, and do more than that, but to be a Jewish voice in aid to refugees around the world. If our Jewish texts teach us anything, it is that the human story is one of exile and migration, and that the gift of home is a sacred blessing. HIAS is that beacon, that Jewish beacon, advocating for and working to create home for too many in our world today. So we at Micah are proud to work with them and hope to encourage other synagogue communities to invest in and create such partnerships. Even before we go on to the main event for the evening, I simply also want to mention that there are a number of HIAS people here in the room. One of them is Ronit Zemmel, who is sitting in the back row, and I will hear from it the entire way home that I had the temerity to mention her name. But how can a father not be proud of his daughter? So excuse me. It's my pleasure to introduce HIAS Vice President for Policy and Advocacy, Naomi Steinberg, and welcome her fellow panelists to the stage to discuss the state of play regarding the policy and advocacy sphere and how HIAS guides asylum seekers to legal relief. Thank you all to be here. Naomi and your panelists, it's all yours.
Now I feel like I want to embarrass Ronit too, but I'm going to refrain. Okay, just want to make sure, can folks on Zoom hear me and see me? Yes. Okay, I was going to say let's assume yes unless we hear otherwise. So I want to thank all of you for having us here this evening. This is my first in-person event in 2.5 years. I hope I don't embarrass myself or HIAS. I am Naomi Steinberg. I am the Vice President for U.S. Policy and Advocacy at HIAS, and I just want to join in the thanks to Temple Micah for having us here this evening, but more importantly for the long-term relationship between the synagogue and HIAS.
Can you speak a little into the mic?
Sure. And I know what your support has meant to us, and most importantly, the people that we serve. So a tremendous, tremendous thank you to all of you. I know that I'm guessing that almost everyone in the room and on Zoom knows who HIAS is, but just in case, let me just give you a quick overview. I'll keep this super brief. We are the international Jewish humanitarian organization that provides vital services to refugees now in 17 countries. We advocate for the rights of forcibly displaced people to rebuild their lives and seek to create a world in which they find safety, welcome, and opportunity. The slightly longer version of that is we've been doing this for almost 140 years. We have worked to achieve protection for refugees, doing so from a deep rooting in our Jewish history, our values, and our text, and our experience. But our clients today come from all over the world, from diverse faiths and ethnicities and backgrounds. We provide direct services to forcibly displaced people, and we advocate for fair and humane refugee policies. Tonight, specifically, we are focusing on asylum, our asylum system here in the US, and the policies that are in place and the impacts that they have on real, honest-to-goodness people. But I want to put this into a larger context because the asylum challenges that we are facing here in the United States are not taking place in a vacuum. They're taking place in a global context. According to the UN Refugee Agency, by the end of 2021, there were more than 100 million people who were forcibly displaced for any number of reasons. That is the largest number in recorded history. Let's just think about that. In recorded history, that is a dubious honor. Of that massive number, 4.6 million of them are thought to be asylum seekers. An asylum seeker is someone who has fled from their home country, is seeking safety in a different country, but has not yet received legal recognition, has not yet been legally defined as a refugee. Asylum seekers come from around the world. That is the case here in the United States too, at our US southern border. The news might portray one thing, but the reality is asylum seekers come from all over. from Nicaragua to Haiti to India to Cameroon to China to Ukraine. The list goes on and on and on. What these people, these families are finding when they arrive is what we're here to talk about tonight. So I'm going to personalize this a little bit because, oh, I just realized I'm still wearing that. Super classy. I recently had the unique opportunity to spend the better portion of a day with Customs and Border Protection, CBP agents in El Paso, Texas. Part of the experience involved me spending time in a CBP shelter. So this is a shelter for people who have been apprehended by Border Patrol after crossing the border and before they go elsewhere to a numerous number of places. What I saw literally took my breath away. When I walked in, I literally took a sharp breath because while I was intellectually prepared for what I was going to see, the reality was still shocking. What I saw was this. I saw pods that were filled with people. These are rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows. I'm looking into an interior hallway, and they were over capacity by several hundred people. People were literally crammed in like sardines. I saw children who were the ages of my nephews, so 10, 12, 13 years old, lining the hallways while their room was, quote, desanitized. These are kids who came to this country by themselves. I saw people, including little children, who were being forced to stay in tents outside in the El Paso desert. It was 96 degrees that day. Winds were at 35 miles an hour. I know because I was trying to hold my skirt down so it didn't blow up. But I mean, the winds were significant. There were rattlesnakes. And the reason those people were outside is because it was too crowded inside. And I saw a group of Haitian men, women, and children, the adults in leg shackles. They were in shackles, being led onto a prison bus, and I call it a prison bus because there were bars on the windows. They were about to be expelled back to Haiti. Some of the women were screaming and crying, and I will never, never forget it. But what I saw was really a broken system, plain and simple, broken from start to finish. I saw a system that for many reasons, many of its own making, is overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of people attempting to find safety in this country, even with extremely restrictive border policies in place. I saw people who knew what they were going to encounter when they came to the United States, but were so desperate to leave their homes that they were willing to risk the indignities of the US border policies. We need to think about everything that went wrong in their lives in order to find themselves in pods, in tents in the El Paso desert, boarding that bus before they made that gut-wrenching decision to try their luck in the United States. We need to think about our asylum policies and how they expel now the majority of people coming to this border before they can even formally ask for protection, which is in fact their legal right. They're doing nothing but exercising their legal right. And we need to think about the Biden administration's asylum policies and how they are trying to figure out how to move people through the system faster, but running into roadblock after roadblock. What we need and do not have is a humane, legal, and orderly process for everyone who presents at the border. That is not to say that everyone who presents at the border should be granted asylum, but everyone who presents at the border should be treated with dignity and have access to an orderly process. So, in terms of some policies, this is a very fortuitous time to be having this discussion. We are literally waiting any day now for the Supreme Court to make a decision about what is known as the Remain in Mexico program. The formal name is the Migration Protection Protocols, which is a deeply ironic name. This is a policy that has forced more than 70,000 people, mostly from Central America, to wait in extremely dangerous conditions in Mexico while their immigration cases proceed through the US immigration court system. And some of you have likely heard of Title 42. That's still in effect as well. Title 42 is a World War II era public health policy. It is not an immigration policy that has been used to expel asylum seekers before they can even make a case for why they can't return home. The Haitians I saw in leg shackles were being expelled because of Title 42. Since its inception in 2019, there have been more than 1 million expulsions. Not only do both of these policies violate our domestic law and obligations under international treaties, they also have dire human consequences. As a result of both policies, thousands of asylum seekers who were expelled or forced to wait under MPP have been targets of kidnapping, robberies, and torture, essentially living a humanitarian nightmare created by our government. The Biden administration has tried to end both of these policies. Both are caught up in the court system. As I said, the Supreme Court is about to rule on Remain in Mexico. And as an advocate, what really concerns me is that Congress is talking about, is sort of puffing its collective chest, talking about trying to codify Title 42 in perpetuity to make sure that this public health policy is kept in place for quite a while. So, what we are left with are people in need of real safety and a system that is not equipped to help them. We need significant reform, and we can talk about what that means later. But what my colleagues are going to do is talk about what this really means on the human level, what they have seen as HIAS employees, what they have seen at the border, what their colleagues have seen, and it is my real pleasure to introduce them now. So we have Sue Kenny-Falzer, who is our HIAS director for our Border and Asylum Network. On the end, we have Smita Dazo, the HIAS senior director of our Legal and Asylum Department, and Erin Nemovich, our colleague that we wouldn't have without your support, so we really do thank you. She is our Temple Micah Migrant Support Paralegal. And so now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna have a conversation. I'm gonna ask them some questions, and so that they can really try to humanize these big picture policy problems that we were just talking about.
So I will just ask you all, hold the mic very close to your face, especially if you're wearing your mask, so that we can all hear it well. I think that the folks on here, so they can hear as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with you, Sue. So I just provided big picture, a dire picture. So, but when we drill down, drill past all of that and look at past all the policy jargon, Title 42, MPP, there's a real human impact. These policies affect real people every single day. Can you share with us what you and your team have seen firsthand at the border and what these impacts really look like?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Okay. So I decided to talk about the 3 Ds. First is due process. The Remain in Mexico policy robs asylum seekers of any semblance of due process. The lawyers in the room will know what I'm talking about, but for the non-lawyers, it's your right to have your case adjudicated. It's what's ensconced in U.S. law as well as international law and treaties, like Naomi said. Just the right to justice. And if you lose after you get a fair shake, fine. But these people are being sent back to Mexico where it is extremely difficult to get legal representation from a U.S. lawyer, because these are U.S. proceedings, but they're in another country, so they have to try to access lawyers in another country. Most lawyers on the U.S. border, including the highest border fellows, with the exception of one, aren't even allowed to travel across the border into the border towns because it's so dangerous. Their agencies will not let them. So only out of the 5,000 people that have been enrolled into MPP in this second go-round, this is the second go-round for MPP, we didn't really get into the weeds of that, but less than 5% of them have been able to obtain legal representation. And out of the about 1,400 that have had their cases adjudicated in front of the judge, only 2.4% have won asylum. Now compare that to the national average in the United States of around 50%. When people have the opportunity to be in safety, when they're trying to put their case together and get their heads in the right place, right, before they go testify. They have access to attorneys. They have the ability to gather their evidence. And it's not on an accelerated pace. The MPP court docket is only 6 months from start to finish, and often it's shorter than that. So it's really accelerated. They have to find lawyers quick. It's just a complete lack of due process. Second is danger. As I mentioned briefly, these border cities are extremely dangerous. Some of them are ranked as dangerous as Iraq or Syria by the US State Department, as do not travel places. But yet we're sending vulnerable migrants back there when all they're doing is coming to the border seeking safety, which is their legal right. Since Biden was inaugurated, there have been, I made notes so I wouldn't forget, more than 10,000 violent attacks against migrants in these border towns that have been documented. That's just what's been documented. So think of how many there actually are. The third is desperation. Title 42 and MPP together have just created such desperation. You know, when I go to the border and I'm in the shelters on the Mexico side, people are just so desperate for anything, any glimmer. And all of our colleagues, HIAS Mexico colleagues, have to say, I'm sorry, there's literally no legal way to ask for asylum right now. And if they make the decision, because they're so desperate, to try to cross what we call cross irregularly, not at a port of entry, which, by the way, they're only doing because they can't walk up to a port of entry. If they could walk up to a port of entry, they would, but they can't. So if they reach this level of desperation, they are willing to cross the Rio Grande, and dozens have died doing so, or to cross the border, the desert, and die in the desert, or scale a wall and willing to know they're going to break both their legs when they land, but they're willing to do that because of this level of desperation in these dangerous cities where they are. And it's also led to, these policies have also led to more family separation. It didn't stop after, the family separation crisis ended, because parents often make the heartbreaking decision that, at least if I send my child to the border alone, I know that they'll be let in. And so they make that heartbreaking decision, and then these families are separated indefinitely. So those are the real world consequences we're seeing of these policies on the ground.
Sue, I'm going to stick with you for a second. Could you walk us through what I mentioned briefly, the Supreme Court case, and what the ramifications are? So if the Biden administration wins, so the Biden administration is trying to end the Remain in Mexico policy. If they win, does that mean the policy is done? If they don't win, the state of Texas, who is trying to keep this policy in place, if the state of Texas wins, what does that mean? What does this court case really mean for MPP's future?
I want you to jump in on this too, if I miss anything, but even if the Biden administration wins, in terms of the Supreme Court decides to vacate the injunction that the Texas judge has put in place, which forced the Biden administration to re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, it's not going to end, because Texas is going to keep fighting. They're going to file more cases, or they're going to file more actions within this case, or it's not going to end anytime soon, even if we win in the Supreme Court, unfortunately. Which means, again, MPP is going to keep going. If the Biden administration loses, again, MPP is going to continue indefinitely with no glimmer of hope. And what, even more, that's not even more troubling, but if the Biden administration loses this case, what it means for future administrations, that a president doesn't have the ability to make its own border policy, a president doesn't have his or her own ability to manage foreign policy, that a single judge in one of our states can dictate border policy and foreign policy. That's really the upshot of if Biden loses this, if the Biden administration loses this case, what that means for future administrations. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Their consequences are daunting. Thank you, Sue. So Smita, I'm going to turn to you. So a lot of the coverage right now about asylum focuses on the US-Mexico border, and understandably so. There is obviously a lot going on there. But what are some of the ways that HIAS represents people seeking asylum here in the DC area and nationally? And in addition, this past year however we define the past, this past year has been challenging for so many different reasons. And I'm wondering if in your work there have been unique challenges as you and your team have been working with asylum seekers.
Yes, I think is the short and long answer. So, there's a lot of attention paid to asylum seekers at the border, but what a lot of people don't realize is that asylum seekers, for the most part, are temporarily at the border. They cross over and then they get to their final destination. Usually that's where they have family members or friends, or they are a friend of a friend, or even they know that, say, Washington, D.C. has a large Salvadoran population, so they go there, looking to find community. And so, what they're bringing with them is they're bringing the trauma that they experienced, when they fled their home country. But what we're seeing now is asylum seekers coming with even greater trauma from especially those who were able to make it in when the Remain in Mexico policy was first dropped. We're seeing asylum seekers who are bringing a lot of that with them. We're seeing a lot of distrust. It's really hard to work with an attorney when, your first experience at the United States, you've committed no crime, but you heard Naomi's description of what detention looks like for asylum seekers. Their only crime is having been victimized in their own country, and they're treated like criminals here. But what we see at HIAS, we see asylum seekers from all over the world. We see those who do come in from our southern border, but there are a lot of asylum seekers who actually come here on an airplane. They come here with a tourist visa or a student visa, and they overstay. And they seek the protection of the U.S. government. At HIAS, we have 4 attorneys and 2 wonderful paralegals in our Silver Spring office, and we have 3 attorneys in our New York office. And we represent close to 800 individuals in both locations. And we are very unique in our services because we are one of the few legal service organizations that provides our assistance 100% pro bono, and the majority of the population we serve are those who are in deportation proceedings. These are cases that are extremely difficult. They can last 5 to 6 years sometimes, and so you have to have a lot of stamina and a lot of patience. And something that we really pride ourselves on at HIAS is really prioritizing trauma-informed care for our service providers, and also understanding secondary trauma. Because when you work with asylum seekers day in and day out, it's almost impossible not to take some of that home with you. And I feel like I'm going off on weird tangents, and you asked some questions, and I want to make sure I'm actually answering them.
No, I asked about the challenges, and those are challenges.
So another challenge I want to mention, I think we're going to talk about this later, is so much of immigration is really what is the crisis of the day, and being ready and able to meet the needs. In 2017, I'm sure you can all remember, there were large populations of unaccompanied minors that were coming to the United States. And, immigration attorneys like myself, we all suddenly became experts in, immigration relief for immigrant children. During family separation, we worked closely with KIND, another pro bono another organization in the U.S. that works primarily with children. Once the families were reunited, HIAS represented the parents and KIND represented the children. And that was very difficult, working with families who have been reunited after separation. And now there's global crises. Working with Afghans starting in October, and now we're working with Ukrainians. We have to be very nimble in the world of immigration, and we have to stay stay up to date on what's going on. In the last 2 weeks alone, there have been probably something like 8 really important court cases that have come down, not just the Supreme Court, but in federal district court, that have had huge impacts on immigrants. We need to know what's going on because we need to be able to advise the people that come to see us on what their best options are, and then we need to support them through the journey that they take to seek those options. So that's the message I would really want to share, is that immigration and asylum seekers are everywhere. They start at the border, but they're right here in our community. They need support, they need community. One of the things I really love about the work that we have at HIAS is our strong community engagement team and volunteer coordination work. The volunteers that we work with that support our asylum seekers make such a huge difference in their lives. They offer them community, friendship, and support when they have lost everything that they've known.
Thank you, Smita. We're going to turn to you now, Erin. The reason for the evening. You've been working at HIAS since January as the Temple Micah Migrant Support Paralegal. So just a few questions for you. How are you assisting asylum seekers? What does your work look like? And you've been working really hard for a really long time, but is there one particular moment or one particular situation or case that really stands out to you?
No? Okay, great. Yeah, so the majority of the people I work with, both with my work with the Silver Spring legal team and the border response team, is with asylum seekers. That's with most of the people that I work with every day, so that's what my work every day revolves around. So at the Silver Spring Direct Legal Service clients, I work with a lot of asylum seekers on preparing their declarations, gathering the evidence needed in support of their asylum application. I work with them on applying for and renewing their work permit so that they have the right to work while their asylum case is pending. I also man the intake line where I help direct people who are newly arrived to the area to speak with attorneys for advice on going forward with their asylum case. And then with the border team, I run or kind of supervise a great volunteer document translation program. So we mainly work with people who are in MPP, and like Sue said, there's really no good access to legal services there. So we try and give them the best shot of presenting their evidence to the court by translating these documents that show evidence of their persecution. And I think it's worth mentioning that everything is in English in the US court system. Like, you can't turn in something written in Spanish and expect a judge to hear it, unfortunately. So a lot of my work is making the asylum process linguistically accessible. I'm fluent in Spanish, nothing else, unfortunately. But so I work with a lot of Spanish speakers, helping them present their case in English, essentially. And so a lot of the people in MPP whose declarations I either translate or review, unfortunately, I will see cases where people start talking about the persecution they faced in their home country, but they end the declaration talking about the same level of persecution that they faced in Mexico, how it's, in some cases, it got worse. And that, unfortunately, is caused by the US border policy where they're trying to come to find safety. So when we're talking about like a recent example, I want to tell a story that's kind of related to that. So recently I was interpreting for a pro se asylum application clinic, so basically helping people with limited scope representation just to fill out and complete their asylum application. And the man we were working with at the end started talking about how he's really afraid where he's staying in Mexico. And he talked about how he had recently been kidnapped and everything he had gone through. And so we helped him request and support a non-refoulement interview. So that's basically saying, don't return me to Mexico because I fear persecution there, not just in my home country. And I guess I feel impactful because last week we heard that he did pass that non-refoulement interview and he's freed into the US to pursue his asylum claim here. So little things like that.
It's truly extraordinary. I'm so excited that you've been able to be part of that kind of work. Before we turn to the audience questions, I'm going to give you, Sue, the last question from me. You know, as I mentioned in the beginning, people seek asylum from all over the world, and we have, of course, seen an uptick in arrivals of asylum seekers from Ukraine. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how their experiences have been different from those of asylum seekers, let's say, from an African or a Latin American or Caribbean country, and what those differences have really looked like.
Before I do that, I just want to give a little more praise to Erin because she single-handedly runs our translation project. You have how many volunteers?
Recently, up to over 50.
Over 50 volunteers and hundreds of documents, so she's really keeping that program together. So, yeah, this has been a bit of a sore topic because unfortunately with the Ukrainian war, the war happening in Ukraine, the Americans tend to see them as real refugees and they need help, and they do, but so do all the people at the border with black and brown skin that have been waiting for years for their chance, for their legal right to seek refuge. And so Ukrainians have been treated differently at the southern border. Recently, well, I guess it was maybe a couple of months ago now, when the war really hit that level, there were 10,000 asylum seekers that went to Tijuana from Ukrainian asylum seekers. And rather than make them wait or expel them back into Mexico like most other populations were being done, Customs and Border Protection processed them. 10,000 people in 2 weeks, only Ukrainians. So what that demonstrates is that our government does have the capacity and the ability to process people when it has the political will to do so. And we are not saying that the Ukrainians shouldn't have been treated that way, absolutely, but we think every asylum seeker should be treated like the Ukrainians were. The dignity that they were shown, all asylum seekers that don't have white skin, that aren't of European descent, they deserve that same kind of protection.
Thank you. And it also just really points to how intertwined our asylum and refugee policies are with foreign policy issues, right? You know, these things are not separate, and you can draw a direct line from our overseas policies to what's going on at our southern border. But with that said, we're now going to open this up for questions, both from those of you who are in the room and on Zoom. I actually put that iPad on the piano, which probably wasn't helpful. Thank you, Chelsea. If you're in the room, please just raise your hand if you have a question. Thank you, Chelsea.
I just had a question about the logistics for you. Mostly, how do you communicate with the refugees that you're helping? Yeah.
Well, I speak Spanish, and the majority of the people I work with do speak Spanish. Sometimes I do work with a fair amount of, or assisting with a fair amount of Afghan asylum cases as well, so I have used language line interpreters or other interpreters, but I try my best to to make it clear.
But I was more also interested in terms of the actual people that are at the border.
Oh,
like,
sorry.
Are you talking to them on Zoom through or through their cell phone? Like, how is it working logistically?
So I don't have much direct contact with the people whose documents I help translate. That is generally gone through, through HIAS Mexico or other partner organizations at the border that collect the documents.
Okay.
And then they'll send me a picture of
Okay.
varying quality. But for some of them, like for pro se clinics, we use WhatsApp a lot. WhatsApp is
Okay.
very helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks so much for everything you do. So I have a question about the Supreme Court case. So first, let me just make sure, maybe for non-lawyers, to make sure we all have the right context. So the Biden administration did eliminate the Remain in Mexico policy, but then the Texas/Trumpists filed a lawsuit, found a judge in Texas to stay it, and then what's at the Supreme Court is whether the Biden administration would be allowed to eliminate the policy. Can you guys just explain what the Biden administration wanted to put in place of the Remain in Mexico policy, which I understand, and I get the point that we don't know what's going to happen because there'll be lots of litigation, but it might be good to explain that. And then also, tell me if I have this right, Secretary Mayorkas, who's kind of the lead person in framing these policies, he used to be on the board of HIAS, right?
However, since he's joined the administration, we really don't have contact with him. Yes, so we didn't get into the weeds of all that for the non-lawyers because it's just a lot of procedural stuff. But yeah, the Biden administration tried to end the Remain in Mexico policy. Texas filed a case, and the judge said, this memo you wrote is not sufficient, plus some other stuff, and said, put an injunction in place and said you have to restart the policy in good faith. What the Biden administration was going to do instead of the MPP policy was, and this is well, no, Title 42 was already in place. So Title 42 puts a wrench into everything, right? Because Title 42 just stops any process from happening. But my understanding is that regular, quote unquote, regular asylum processing would eventually be started again instead of MPP. And MPP is only applied, it's not applied to everyone that is apprehended after crossing the border. I won't get into the weeds of it unless you want me to ask a question, but there's a variety of different things that can happen to someone when they are apprehended after crossing the border. That's part of the problem, is that people describe it as chaos. It's because the administration has made it chaotic. They could be put into MPP, they could be put into expedited removal, they could be processed in and given a notice to appear. So it gets very confusing. But with Title 42 still in place, what happened when the Biden administration first ended MPP was there was a wind down process. And HIAS was a huge part of that, actually. Gathering up the folks that were in MPP 1.0 and processing them into the US with parole so that they could continue their asylum case from within the United States. However, with Title 42 in place, it's not like anyone could just come up to the port of entry and be processed. But eventually, the idea was Title 42 would end, regular asylum processing would continue, and no one would be sent back to Mexico. I hope that was a bit rambling, I'm sorry, but I hope that answers your question.
And I will just say, in terms of Secretary Mayorkas, we have been very vocal at HIAS about when we have concerns about asylum policy and the other issues that DHS has purview over. But there is something nice about knowing that there is somebody in that position who has a deep connection to a refugee's story. His work, I wouldn't trade positions with him for a gazillion dollars. The challenges he is facing. And so while we come out hard with our positions, I think a lot of us also have a great deal of appreciation for the many challenges that he's trying to balance. I will also say, before turning to some of the Zoom questions, that the Biden administration really very recently has started to implement some new plans to try to unblock some of the asylum program. So, for example, right now in a few pilot places, asylum seekers go through what is known as a credible fear interview, the baseline to see if they have a credible fear about returning home. And those that are found to have a credible fear now, if they're going to one of 6 cities, this is a brand new program, will have the opportunity to have their case heard in front of not an immigration judge, which is automatically an adversarial process, and that is the case now before this program, and the backlog, is for years and years and years. This new program is that they will be able to be in front of an asylum officer and able to state their case there. And if they are rejected, then they can go in front of an immigration judge. The idea behind this is to expedite the process from something that could take years and years and years to months. Is it a perfect program? No. We have real concerns that this expedited process will make it almost impossible for asylum seekers to find counsel And, getting through the asylum system without somebody like Smita or Aaron or Sue is next to impossible. And we also have concerns about the attorneys having time to prepare cases in that amount of time. But it is a major step. It is one of the most significant changes to the asylum system in quite a while, and so we need to see how that's going to pan out. So, okay. I'm going to skip the question about policy and advocacy, so I don't, okay. Are there other organizations doing similar work? Do you work together? Smita, why don't you take that?
So much of our work, both at the border and in the interior of the U.S., are partnership-based. For those of you who don't know, we have a HIAS Border Fellows program where we help to fund attorneys at legal service organizations along the border to expand their capacity and increase representation for asylum seekers at the border. And so much of that really is in partnership. We do have a field coordinator in Brownsville, Texas, but as you can see, a lot of our border team is here. And so, the way for us to really connect and understand what's happening, understand where the gaps are so that we can help to fill them, is in working in partnership with those organizations. And there's a number that we work with along the border, but we also work in collaboration with organizations in the interior of the U.S., both in our direct services work through referrals. So locally, we work with a lot of organizations, Tahirih Justice Center, IUTA, KIND, which I mentioned before. In New York, we work closely with NILAG. And, the way, it's a really good community to be in immigration legal services. I think of it very much as a community because there are a lot of referrals back and forth. At the end of the day, our goal is the same, and it's to serve the asylum seeker and provide them the support that they need. We work with a lot of community-based organizations, health clinics, physicians, mental health providers. It's really essential for us that our legal clients receive the support that they need in their lives and not just in their legal cases. And if we're unable to provide that, we want to connect them with organizations that can. So partnerships are really essential in the work that we do.
Thank you. I am going to circle back to the policy advocacy question. I'm a little biased, but the question is, in addition to HIAS's direct representation of asylum seekers, does HIAS have a policy advocacy program, and if so, what are its goals? We do have a policy advocacy program. We are not divided. We have two branches of our policy and advocacy work. I work on our U.S. policy and advocacy team. We have a newly founded international policy and advocacy team, which really came about from our growth as a real international organization. As I said earlier, we work in 17 countries, and so we really needed to branch out a little bit. For my team, the U.S. policy side, we work in two main buckets. One is the U.S. asylum program. The other is the U.S. refugee resettlement program, which is not something we're talking about this evening, but I would love to talk with you about it at some point. And so for both of them, we are now in the position of really advocating for policies that are helping to rebuild and restore refugee protection in the United States, because both of these programs were almost obliterated over the past several years, and so we have our work cut out for us. For the refugee resettlement side, we are looking to increase the number of refugees who come through the resettlement program. This year's maximum number to arrive is 125,000. As of the end of last month, we had admitted 12,000. So those numbers speak for themselves. So there is a lot of rebuilding to do. And for the asylum side, I mean, we've talked about what some of these policies are and how dangerous they are. So we're really fighting to restore the basic level of humanity to our asylum system, specifically ending Title 42, making sure that Remain in Mexico doesn't come back in another iteration, making sure that whatever new asylum policies are put in place are effective and are equitable, which we have not seen for a while. So I will say that if you go to the HIAS website and our Take Action page, there are many, many, many ways to get involved, not just with volunteering or donating or, all of those options, but also advocacy options too. And I encourage you to sign up. You'll start to get action alerts from us, statements, and it's a really good way to keep up to date on our policy priorities. We have time for one more question. I saw your hand, so it's,
Webinar on Tuesday.
Go ahead.
We have a webinar on Tuesday at 4 o'clock that is specifically about border-related work at HIAS. And we'll be joined by one of our border fellows from Trella, right? Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid.
Yeah, she's based in Laredo, Texas.
I know it may be against the rules, Naomi, but I'm going to ask you to go back and tell us how it is possible that we have only admitted 12,000 refugees, and it is, as last I checked, June 23rd.
Yeah, it's not against the rules. I like the question. There are a lot of different reasons for that, but the core reason is it's a lot harder to rebuild something than it is to destroy it, and our program really was almost destroyed. And when I talk about it almost being destroyed, what I mean is that this is not just the HIAS network. HIAS is one of 9 national refugee resettlement agencies, but among all of us, over 100 local organizations had to shut down, the organizations that do the real resettlement work. We, across this network, lost staff. And not only was the domestic infrastructure really shattered, so is the overseas infrastructure. So the entire process of identifying refugees who need to be resettled and come to the United States, interviewing them, which falls under the auspices of the Department of Homeland Security, that whole process, that whole infrastructure withered on the vine. And so we are rebuilding. And what we just keep saying is that we are trying to rebuild and function while flying the plane. We're flying the plane while we're rebuilding it. And so that's where we are. And I will also say, without going down this rabbit hole too much, that when we talk about all of the Ukrainians who are coming and all of the Afghans that this country so generously welcomed, 76,000 of them, the vast, 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 vast majority of them are not coming through the refugee resettlement program. They're coming, and we're not going to get into this could be a whole other hour, but they're coming in with what is known as humanitarian parole. So that means that our local resettlement offices are still working with these individuals as they should and as we are honored to do. But that has taken the focus away, not at the local level, because we want to serve anybody or everybody who comes in through the program, but it has taken a focus away from the US government. We seem to be having a hard time walking and chewing gum at the same time. And so one of our real advocacy goals moving forward is that we have to globalize the resettlement program again. It's never meant to be. We can just focus on one population at a time. But that has, in fact, been what's happening. So there are a lot of reasons why we're slow to pick up again.
Before we end, can I just say thank you to Temple Micah for sponsoring the paralegal position that Erin is in. It's been so wonderful to have her. And, speaking for my department, the Translations Project would not exist without Erin. And it's all across the border. We're the only organization offering this kind of, large scale, it's relatively small scale, but larger than any other organization is the document translation project. So I wanted to thank you all for your support of Erin and her position.
And I'm going to add and embarrass you a little bit more that on the legal side, our capacity has been expanded enormously thanks to Erin. There are so many cases that we would not have otherwise been able to take that we have accepted for representation because we have Erin's assistance and support with all of our clients. So it has been a tremendous gift to HIAS that you have given us, and thank you for that.
Thank you. So what we're
You're
going
a
to
tremendous gift.
So we're going to have a quick transition now. So it's my pleasure, I think most of you know her, to introduce Chelsea. She is our Director for Community Engagement here in the DC area, and she's going to be coming up and moderating the next panel, which is entitled Fixing a Broken System, Individual and Community Action.
that applause, I just want to add, everyone on Zoom was also clapping, you just couldn't hear them, so, but I saw them.
Could I ask my fellow panelists to come up and join me? Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be back at Temple Micah. I was reminded, as Naomi and Sue were talking earlier, that I was here in 2019 talking about MPP as it had just left its pilot phase. And we were just about to open up an office in Mexico. And it's remarkable to think now, sitting here in 2022, the changes that have happened. And truly the interconnected histories between HIAS and Temple Micah during this time. So it's a pleasure to be back and to see everyone. I wish it was on better circumstances, of course, than talking about this dire topic, but thank you for being here and thank you for caring about this issue. It is my pleasure to introduce my other panelists this evening. Sitting next to me here is Rabbi Sarah Bassin, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to share with you that not only is Sarah just a few months into her tenure with HIAS, she moved to Washington, D.C. last week. So allow me to welcome you.
It's been great to be here.
We are happy to have you here as a member of our community. Of course, you all know Rabbi Crawley. Thank you for being on the panel. And lastly, we have Kathy, who is a Temple Micah member, as well as a member of HIAS's Border Response Volunteer Program. So, I am going to jump us right in. And Rabbi Bassin, as our last panel really examined, the asylum system in our country was the focus of intense and unrelenting animus by the previous administration. And the effectiveness of that strategy can be seen in the asylum system as it exists today, sadly. I would love for you to share how HIAS is assisting Jewish communities in getting involved. And what exactly is the Jewish movement for refugees?
I want to start big picture with this question and talk about the power and the role of community, because I think a lot of the time there's a lot of clothes renting, a lot of doom and gloom in the Jewish community and religious communities in general about the trajectory of religious life in the 21st century, right? That it's all downhill, that synagogues, that churches, that mosques, it's all irrelevant. I have plenty of critiques about the Jewish communal endeavor, but allow me to indulge what I think we do well. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs offered a really important thought, that religion gives us the tools to live in a framework of responsibility, not of rights, to order our lives in a sense of what we owe to others, not of what others owe to us. But that's only half the equation of what religion and religious community can do. Because rather than just directing one person towards good, it leverages the communal ability to focus our attention on one specific thing and make an impact. One person can't a society change, right? It's like a single sandbag against a flood of discrimination, of terror, of injustice. But when you leverage all of those individuals as sandbag built on sandbag, you can actually build a moral levee to hold back the tide, to change the trajectory of where society is headed. So how is HIAS leveraging the communal good of the Jewish community? Well, in part, it comes from our 140-year history of doing this resettlement work, but more importantly, it comes from the fact that we have a network of 450 congregations who are part of our Welcome campaign. What is the Welcome campaign? Very simply, it's an articulation of values that refugees and asylum seekers and the plight of displaced persons matter to our community, that it is core to our DNA that we address their concerns and their safety and well-being. And when you go to an elected official with the power of 450 communities formally behind you, you are able to speak with a different level of moral voice and authority and get them to listen. But that's just the first layer. Underneath that kind of communal backdrop of force, there's also a really sophisticated strategy that we're bringing to the fore. All of us know that legislative policy is being determined by an increasingly small margin of lawmakers who are in a number of purple states. That there is the left, that there is the right, that there are folks in Colorado, in Michigan, in Georgia. There are fewer and fewer people who are swayable on these issues. And we've developed a really sophisticated infrastructure of clergy, of grassroots leaders at synagogues to be able to go to lawmakers when it really matters. And finally, in the direct volunteering sense, I've only been at HIAS for 3 months, but I'm really seeing this on the ground with the welcome circles that we have built, that we are creating teams of people at synagogues to help replace the infrastructure that has been decimated in our resettlement agencies. When these resettlement agencies don't have the capacity or don't have the legal means because of the policies by which people are being brought in, it's communities that can step up and take on the role with the shared expertise of HIAS and other organizations to help make it happen. We did this with Afghans, we're doing it with Ukrainians, and God willing, because of the success of this program, we should hopefully be able to apply it to asylum seekers in the near future.
Thank you so much for sharing that model with us. Rabbi Crowley, I want to bring you into the conversation now. And in the spirit of praise and embarrassment, which seems to have been a common theme this evening, I just want to say, as the Washington Director for Community Engagement at HIAS, that Temple Micah stands out so clearly as a perfect example of the ladder of engagement on this issue, of asking again and again, what can we do? How can we do it? I would love for you to tell us the story of Sukkot Shalom, your community's refugee committee, and how that came about, and what you all have been doing.
So, thank you. Thank you for that honor that you directed towards me, but really it's directed outward, because the real story of Sukkot Shalom could be told on one foot, which is we knew we needed to do something, and Temple Micah did it. When we asked, people stood up. When we said we want to bring in a family from Afghanistan, people responded. When we said we want to figure out how to support things at the border, people responded. And when we said there's now an influx of new Afghans who are here, they said new people came in and said yes. And every stage in between have also been participation. The more factual story, which I'm not one to let facts get in the way of a good story, is that in 2006, a group of people met, I think, in that library over there, or maybe there were too many of them that came here on a Sunday morning in November 2006, and said, 2016. Yeah, it would have been great 2006, different era. 2016, thank you. Came in here, I said, what do we do? How are we gonna respond to this moment? And very quickly, as the Muslim ban was coming out and sort of connected to the ethos that were already part of Micah, immigration bubbled to the surface as something that we wanted to directly address. And that's when we got connected with the Lutheran Social Services to resettle our first family. What coalesced was a leadership team, not a committee, and I'll say a little bit more on that in a second. A leadership team that wanted to support this family, and as soon as we were engaged on immigration refugee issues, it just opened up an entire world. What other directions that we could, and tragically, but also, kind of fortuitously, as we were winding down our year with our Afghan family, was when child separation was happening. And so very quickly, our attention turned to the southern border. A number of folks and I went down to the southern border to witness everywhere we went. We said, how can we help? What can we do? And it became very, very clear that legal support was what we had to do. That we can do as much as we are doing and have continued to do with direct service, with sending down dignity kits through HIAS, with sending money to different organizations who are working on the border, but that the number one way to get out of the system, or to even have any chance of surviving it at all with any chance of a successful outcome, you have to have legal support, which you heard before. And so, we sort of dreamed of having a lawyer. At some point I said, Temple Micah is going to be the model, and every Jewish community across the country is going to also send a lawyer, and the Jews are going to send an army of lawyers down to the southern border, and we'll completely fix it. That hasn't happened. But what ended up coming back, just to say a little bit of the story of Aaron, how you came to be, in this position, different sort of how you came to be, is that kind of a year into the pandemic, you all came back to us and said, we don't need more lawyers. Actually, well, we do need more lawyers, but what we really need is administrative support and a paralegal support. And Temple Micah, you clearly have been involved at every level, and could you be our partner in doing something that's not at all sexy? That's not at all high level, and this group of people who, all of us work in worlds where we know the help that's needed and the kind of support that's needed, and Micah said yes, and that was the start of this, and now we're in what we would call Sukkot Shalom Phase 3, 3.0, I think is what we're calling it, which is with the Afghan work that we're doing now, and I'll just say a quick word about that because really it's been opening and opening and opening and expanding. So in addition to supporting a second family with particularly high needs around a medically fragile child, that we are also, there are a number of people who connected to the first family that we have helped secure legal aid for them to have humanitarian parole status, and Temple Micah is their sponsor for humanitarian parole. The process is very hard, and it only actually is enacted if anyone can leave Afghanistan, and we have 8 families, which is something like 40 collected people who, if they manage to make it out of Afghanistan, they'll be able to come into America because of the work that Temple Micah is sort of connecting and doing, which is just incredible. And this is the work that the people are doing on their own. Congregant Ori Hall, who was actually supposed to be sitting in this seat tonight but couldn't come, has been running a lot of that in addition to Karen. Karen Mark's been doing a lot of the WhatsApping back and forth to Afghanistan at all hours of the night. I'm not really sure how that's working. And we're about to start Sukkot Shalom 4.0. And I know I'm rambling a little bit. I just want to say what I think has made the ladder of engagement in your language work is because we didn't start as a social justice committee wanting to do something. We started as a working group that wanted to try to figure out and think about a problem. And when we can fall in love with the problem and not the solution, then we are able to actually continue the work and continue the work and continue the work. And I think what we're seeing with Sukkot Shalom is falling in love with the problem, not as a desire for it to continue, but saying that there's no one solution and there's no one path forward. There's just things that lead to things and that's what that's what I've been really blessed to be able to be on the ground watching amazing, amazing volunteers give up all of their free time to work on these things.
Thank you so much for sharing that history and those reflections with us. I'm very struck by the power of individuals. Individuals that work collectively, individuals that just stand up and say, I can do something. It is almost rather shocking to think now about Erin's position as not being sexy, because you literally cannot mention her name to a member of the HIAS staff without seeing an immediate ear-to-ear grin appear on their face. Erin, let me tell you how Erin helped create impact in my work this week. Let me tell you what Erin did this week. I remember a week after she started talking to one of her supervisors, Stephen Brown, and just the smile could not leave his face of the amount of help he was receiving and how important it was to the work. So really, I'm touched by these moments that we recognize what an individual can do. And Kathy, here's where I want to bring you into this conversation. Because you are a member of Temple Micah, you are also a volunteer with HIAS, and you've been working with Aaron on this translation project. And I would just love for you to share with us what inspired you to get involved, and what is it exactly that you do with Aaron on her team?
Yes, I'm Kathy Seha. I am one of the 50 volunteers that work with Aaron. And I have to say, I participated on a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago with Aaron, and the 50 faces, most of them don't look like me. Most of them look like native Spanish speakers. So my hat's off to HIAS for being able to recruit people who are not Jewish, because personally I come to this from a very Jewish space. I'm a baby boomer. I'm too young to, have lived through World War II, but, my parents and relatives and friends were always talking about people who couldn't make it out of Europe, or people who luckily did, and I always kind of felt like, there but for the grace of God go I. So that's why, HIAS has always been really interesting to me. And I also really like their motto, which is, we used to do this because they were Jewish, now we do this because we are Jewish. And I think that is a wonderful thing, because their assistance is not just limited to Jewish people. And I came to HIAS because about halfway through the lockdown, I began to think that I really did want to spend more time with my family. And so I took the opportunity, like many privileged people, and retired. And that also gave me some time to give something back. And because I speak Spanish, I thought, well, I'll see if HIAS needs something, something that a Spanish speaker could do. And lo and behold, the document translation program. And I also signed up to be a mentor, but I haven't been able to be matched yet. But Aaron is keeping me plenty busy. So, and what I'm doing for HIAS is translating court documents. And periodically, I get kind of a tranche of documents. They are everything from affidavits to testimonials of the person seeking asylum to their identification cards. And I have to reproduce these in English in the vernacular. I have to not only translate the Spanish, but also the legalese, and also remain true to what the asylum seeker is saying. So, I can't, say, oh, this is grammatically incorrect, or, I think he's saying this. It's got to be what that person is saying. And I have to say that, the few I've done a translation from Venezuela, several from Nicaragua, the last one from Colombia. And these are very, very compelling stories. They are, it is, I don't know the correct legal definition of credible fear, but these people have credible fear. And I just feel really fortunate to be able to give this little tiny bit. And because it's, and these, I don't know what happens to the people whose documents I've translated. I'm coming in from the beginning of the process, but, I really truly wish them the best, because there is no question in my mind that they had to leave, and they need to be safe.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like I'm particularly moved by this recognition, this acknowledgement that there is a reason that folks are showing up at the southern border. There is a fear, there is a concern over their lives. And it really connects us back to some of the comments that Sue was making earlier about the fact that we tend, particularly in this town, if we're being honest, to talk about this as a policy issue, to talk about this as, you know, this order and that court thing and this thing and that, but there are real people, real people's lives at stake here. And Rabbi Crowley, I want to come back to you for a moment. You know, for congregations that might be listening on our online audience, I'd love for you to share with them, you know, if they're starting to think about how to get involved, or potentially they're redetermining what their priorities look like in this moment, whether it's because of COVID or Ukraine or Afghanistan, or the numbers regarding the US refugee admissions program that were shared this evening. Where should they start? How should they weigh these priorities? What is the best practice that Sukkot Shalom could offer to some of these communities?
That you're not alone and you don't have to figure it out on your own. And I think actually that's part of what tonight is, in this partnership and this relationship is, it's really easy for us to see sort of the Jewish nonprofit world and the synagogue world as separate. And there are a couple of times where there's overlap, like, oh, great, thank you, HIAS, for this thing, this prayer I'm gonna read on Refugee Shabbat. Now you go do your thing and we'll do our thing. And actually to say that, what would it look like if we shared our resources? If we actually said, we've got volunteers, we've got a platform, we've got otherwise, how can we be in partnership? What's the wisdom that you have that you can share? And so I think, and then what are the resources that a community has? So one very small example like this, someone in this room hosts tax workshops for Lutheran Social Services for refugees. I guarantee that 40% of Jewish communities around the country have a tax lawyer in them. Just an estimate, right? What would it look like to call your local refugee, association and say, we've got a tax lawyer, or we've got an accountant, could we sponsor? Could we help you in that? And figuring out those ways, because all of those ways can help. And I think part of it is also about listening and paying attention to who's in your community and what they're interested in and what engages them most, and starting from that point. So if you're a community that engages really well on direct service, start there. What's needed? And then start with direct service, and then go, and then as soon as you're sort of face to face with the people that you're supporting and helping, you have to move forward. You have to continue working, you have to continue doing something. I think that's what all of us who went on the trip to the southern border realized, is the minute you're face to face with someone, something within you is activated and you can't not help. You can't not figure out what to do next. And so I would say part of that is really about reaching out. There's a lot of amazing organizations, Jewish or not, that are doing this work, and to reach out there. And the other piece I'll just underline here is that there are so many things we could all be doing. We could have just read the news reports that are coming out about the Supreme Court rulings that were released today, or that we anticipate being released in the next weeks, and saying, how do we choose this one thing? And say we can't be in competition for anything. A line that I have said probably to our working group many, many times is that we're just a drop in the bucket, but we're our drop in the bucket. And embracing that attitude, I think, is also helpful. We're not going, a single person is going to be able to translate a number of documents, and that's going to make a difference for someone, or they're going to be able to, sponsor a family or advocate for a policy, and each one of those will end up making a difference, and we can't let ourselves be overwhelmed by sort of the amount that the size of the bucket that's needed. We just have to take one step at a time and figure out what those things are, and to do more than talk. We're really good at talking, and I want us to do more.
Thank you so much for that. I want to extend the metaphor, or continue the metaphor, if you will, and ask you, Rabbi Bassin, for those in the audience that are thinking, okay, I want to be a drop in that bucket. What are 2 actions you wish every Jewish community would take right now to help fix our broken asylum system? Then after this, we're going to turn to audience questions.
Two things. Okay. First and foremost, I think it is essential for us to not lose our sense of moral outrage at what is happening just because the context has changed and we're not paying as much attention to it. There are still families that are being separated for different reasons, but they're still being separated. It is morally reprehensible, Orwellian, and absurd that asylum is closed at the border under the guise of COVID mitigation. We have to hold our outrage and direct that effectively. We have to not let this slip into the background of conversations as 1,000 other things are going to continue to dominate the news cycles. So yes, we are going to hear a lot about a particular Supreme Court case as that news is formally revealed in the coming days. But let's not allow ourselves to stop talking about MPP and about Title 42, and to help in our own communities maintain our focus and raise that up. Now, as individuals, what you can do, HIAS does have a website with a very productive tab of Take Action. You can go, you can sign those petitions. You can, if you're in Maryland, if you're in Virginia, if you know people who have a vote who live outside of DC, you should encourage your friends and family to put pressure on the issue of Title 42 in particular. This is unfortunately a policy where there is bipartisan consensus going in the wrong direction, where politicians are becoming more and more tepid and walking back their support for the basic human right of seeking asylum. We have to put the pressure on. So go to your families, make dinner conversations uncomfortable when you have dinner guests over for the first time in 2 years, and start to bring this back up into people's consciousness.
Amen to that. Yes, so now we're going to switch to some Q&A for just a few minutes.
I'll be the mic person.
Thank you. My question is for you, Kathy. First of all, thank you for what you do. I'm going to ask a really basic question. In what form do you get the documents that you're translating? I'm trying to get a picture of who the person is who's seeking asylum. This is a person who has access to a computer that can send an email with an attachment, or are these kind of handwritten documents on scraps of paper? I'm trying to understand what you're getting and then how you get it to the next people who are going to get it back to the person who needs it.
Some are handwritten documents. Some are official documents that are affidavits from, I don't know, church leaders, or even in one case, an international organization. Some, you know, in one case, the brother of someone submitted an affidavit. And sometimes it's tough because, and they're all, you know, they're all in various, you know, stages of legibility, and, you know, maybe the Xerox machine isn't the greatest, or whatever. But, and they're all, you know, they're images, right? You know, you have to kind of, you know, figure out if something is misspelled, or this is something I learned while doing this, is in some Latin American countries, the address is not just like, you know, 4301 47th Street, it's like 2 blocks from the gas station, or, you know, or something like that. And so it's like, when I first came across this, I was like, does this really say this? I mean, am I missing something? What, you know? So, and then what I have to do is reproduce an official document as close to the document as I can do. The official seal, is, a circle and the translator's note inside, but, it has to, the font has to look a lot like what the official font looked like, and then when I'm satisfied that it's correct and I've gone through it a gazillion times, I send it back to Erin.
Most people have cell phones, and so they take pictures of the evidence, and then through our partners, like Smita was saying, the partners help get it to us, and then Erin then gives it back to our partners to get to the asylum seeker.
I would be remiss to not lose the opportunity to share you how you can get involved with HIAS in other ways. If you are an attorney, it doesn't matter if you do tax law or mergers and acquisitions. We welcome you to our pro bono network. We have a network of almost 1,000 attorneys nationwide who do everything for us, from full representation in asylum cases to discrete research projects for cases. So we want to work with you with whatever time you're able to give. We provide trainings, resources, toolkits, mentorship throughout the process. And that clever button that Sarah mentioned on our website, Take Action, you can also go to that button to learn how to become involved with our pro bono program. And we also have a robust volunteer program, which Kathy. Oh.
Online communities, so I just wanted to make sure that you could address that as well.
Okay.
If you are a Spanish speaker, how do you volunteer to help asylum seekers in the DC area?
Great. So included in our volunteer program, so Kathy is part of our border response translation program, but we actually have interpretation and translation programs for volunteers locally. So that can actually involve interpreting for clients at even client meetings with attorneys, or at an asylum interview, depending on your level of ability. You can get involved in translation projects, so you can press that same button, Take Action, and learn how to get involved with our volunteer program. In addition to document translation interpretation, we have a mentorship program. I mentioned earlier tonight how essential it is for our clients to have community support. Even if you have an hour a week to spend as an English language practice partner with one of our clients, over Zoom, they want to, learn how to maybe speak up during a job interview, or, need practice for a parent-teacher conference that maybe their first one that they ever attend for their child in the United States. Those are the ways that you can get involved, and we really encourage you to do so, because we see with our clients, when they are empowered and supported by their community, they are better able to engage in their legal cases, and we really see a difference in what that means for them. So, yeah.
Thank you all for coming. I just want to add one third point to your call for, advocacy, and that is basically to try and make a more concerted effort to really assist those who have already applied for asylum, who are in the United States, who have been waiting since 2015, 16, 17, 18, for an opportunity to have an interview at the asylum office in their jurisdiction. And as they wait year after year, they're separated from their spouses and children, adding further trauma to themselves and secondary trauma to the children. So one of the really, really important issues in my perspective as a practitioner in this field is to not forget about these 30 to 50 to 75,000 people waiting. And we have to do more to help these people when you look at it comparatively to people who just come to the border, compared to these people from 2015, we have just let them, sit in the chaos for years and years and years. Now, there's a legislative proposal of some sort to hire more people within the Homeland Security Office and the Immigration Department and the asylum system. Anything that your organization can do, or anything that communities can do to actually encourage this would go a very, very long way to helping these people who essentially have been forgotten. The people at the border, the people from Ukraine, the people from Afghanistan have all supplanted these people who have already been victims of torture and continue to wait and wait and wait. And that's a moral outrage.
Thank you so much for your comments, sir. I can see every member of our legal team shaking their head in the audience right now.
Because those people are our
Sue
clients.
is going to respond directly.
Those people are our clients. Like, I personally have clients that have been waiting from the Silver Spring office that have been waiting for their asylum interview since 2015, 2016. And they are part of the mentorship programs that Smita mentioned that are a lifeline for them. As you said, I have clients that hasn't seen their family since 2015, and the mentor is able to be that lifeline for them when they just feel hopeless and be that friend for them. And so yes, they are very much in our consciousness in the legal department. Yeah. The policy. Right. And that is part of our advocacy goals too. Naomi, I don't know if you want to talk to that specifically, but we definitely do advocate. Here, let me give you the.
I can do it pretty loudly too. You're absolutely right. I mean, we consistently support funding asks to make sure that there are more immigration judges and to, for example, this new Biden program to expedite the process would in theory be taking these cases off the dockets of immigration judges and having, USCIS asylum officers adjudicate. So we are on this from a policy perspective as well. I mean, certainly most of that work comes in around through the appropriations process, trying to make sure, because there just quite simply aren't enough immigration judges, and so trying to do our best to make sure that that funding goes there. But asylum officers. Yes, and asylum officers, correct. So I mean, you point to a really terrifically challenging problem, but it is not lost on us, and we're doing our best from a policy perspective as well.
Thank you so much for those comments. I am going to turn it over to Rabbi Crowley for one last word this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone being here tonight. Thank you for everyone who joined on Zoom. Thank you to everyone who is watching in the future, who watches the recording of this. Thank you to our panelists, to Naomi, to Sue, to Smita, Rabbi Bassin, Kathy. Thank you to you, Chelsea, for making so much of this night happen. Thank you, Aaron, for bringing your gifts and your passion to this special partnership. And a huge thank you to Temple Micah, who shows up in the most important of ways. You've given support whenever called upon. I think that tonight exemplifies what the Jewish community can be when we're at our best. When we share our resources, when we work in partnership, when we co-create and build systems that thrive on interdependence. There's so much that we can do together. Thank you for all who came tonight, who learned and witnessed. There is powerful work, important work being done, and it is only the beginning. And it's on each of us to take what we've heard tonight and act on it. And say, Aleinu, it is on us. We'll close with this prayer. I think, Aleinu, it is on us to be the ones who see, to hear the cry of those who yearn for something better, and to match their cry with action, to hear it and be moved by it. Aleinu, it is on each of us whose ancestors wandered in their own deserts because they wandered, because they left home with nothing, because they were separated from their families, because they could never go home again, because they sought gold-lined streets, because they did find a home and they gave it to us. Aleinu, it is on us to be guardians of the unaccompanied, to help free the bounds of slavery, violence, and hunger, to ensure safety within, at, and beyond our borders, to bring families back together. Aleinu, it is on us to bring fairness to an unjust system, to show humanity where there are only numbers and quotas, to make it known that these are people with names and lives and souls that yearn, to say more than hate has no home here, but to build love into its foundations, to lift our lamps beside that golden door, and to welcome with love all who seek to be more than strangers. Aleinu, it is on us, all of us. It has to be. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much.